Welcome to another episode of KinCasts, where we explore the joys of connecting with loved ones through private podcasts. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and I want to help you capture the magic of your family stories.
It was, I didn't want to do this book. And then I decided that maybe there was a lot to learn. And I wanted, I guess, to have more people, even just meet people like my parents, because it was an experience that makes you a different person, I think, once you do it.
That's Max Friedman, author of Painful Joy. Max spent years researching his parents' experience surviving the camps and rebuilding their lives. It's a story filled with hardship, resilience, and surprising discoveries. Get ready for insights on navigating sensitive topics, uncovering hidden truths, and ultimately honoring the stories that shape our families, as Max Friedman shares his experience and how it can help you craft your own compelling family narrative. Well, first of all, Max Friedman, thanks so much for making time for our little program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so your book, Painful Joy, if I got it right, it explores your parents' experiences as Holocaust survivors. Is that right?
Yeah, it's their experiences. About half the book is just finding about them and who they really were, because I didn't know much, and what happened to them during the Holocaust. And then the second half of the book is actually about how that trauma affected my sister and me, and maybe even future generations beyond us.
Yeah, it's such a common story that you hear. It's really interesting. So what sort of was your inspiration? Why did you feel this important to share this? It's a very personal story.
Yeah, I guess actually I tried to avoid sharing this story for most of my life. I'm more than 70 now, God help me. And most of the time, living with our parents and their traumas was enough, and surviving their survival was sufficient. And then one day, about 7 years ago now, my grandson, who was 8 at the time, we had gotten into a little discussion about my mother. He had never met her, so she had died by then. But I talked about her as a survivor, and he got interested in the idea of survival at age 8, and asked me, what does that mean and what really happened to them? And I said, I guess I have to find out. And that's how it started.
So, I've talked to others that sort of talk about this, like it was really quite the detective story to sort of go try to figure this out.
Yeah, it was almost impossible. My father had never spoken about his past at all, except one conversation we had for about 20 minutes when I was 20 years old. Otherwise, I knew nothing. As for my mother, she spoke mostly about her experiences in the concentration camps, which I guess helped traumatize us as much as they had, not as much as they had traumatized her, but more than we needed. So that's what I knew. And I also knew that I was born in Sweden, and I didn't quite understand why. So it was a detective story, quite a lot. It took about 5 years.
So, you have some background in journalism. That probably played a role or at least there was a factor in this. Like, do you think it helped or hurt, or how do you think it played a
Well,
role?
I think it was good just because I sort of knew I wasn't afraid of writing. I actually enjoyed writing. And so it helped me in the writing aspect of it. In the research side, I guess to some degree, but most of the writing that I had done was based on interviews. And I was not interviewing anyone in particular because I had avoided talking to my parents about it because they seemed to be too pained by the whole experience. So we didn't talk about it much. So it was more just trying to find sources and even some people who were still alive, because I did actually find a few people who knew my parents
Hmm.
in those years.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about the parents, don't want to talk about it, and I guess you probably learned something about the sort of impact of that trauma. I mean, how do you think that plays on sort of future generations?
Well, I think on so many different levels. My sister and I have and still have panic attacks that are sort of crazy. Our cortisol levels are really weird, so our flight and fight responses are not what they should be for normal people. And I think I learned to be afraid of everything. And it took me a long time to sort of unwind all the fears that I think I inherited from watching them and from them trying to protect us from the world.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas of how families sort of can create, more open communication there? I mean, how does that work between
Uh,
your, say,
I,
grandchildren and so on?
Yeah, well, I think I guess was probably too open with them once I discovered. Until I discovered it, my kids, I have two twin boys, and they now are 40, getting to be 47, God help me too. But they knew my parents, so they understood something about them and what they were. For my grandchildren, it's up to me to talk about them because there are instructive things, particularly the craziness that's going on these days, uh, for them about the past and about how it keeps coming back.
Yeah, it seems like a challenge to sort of navigate that with bringing the realities to it, but somehow also sort of fostering some positive and hopeful outlook.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty frightening thing. I mean, we were frightened, and we saw the effects on our parents, which were sort of disastrous. Uh, so it's hard to put that into context, but writing the book actually helped me quite a lot in sort of understanding them better and understanding how they affected me and my sister in ways that I think we had avoided for a very long time. So it was therapeutic in a certain level, uh, and I think for other people who do these kinds of things, I think they get quite a lot out of it just for themselves. And I think given the experiences that they had and the reasons for those experiences, it is instructive for other people to learn about and to learn about it in a personal way, as opposed to sort of in school, people teach you history.
Kind of in the abstract.
Right.
So, I mean, do you think that healing aspect, I mean, you sort of mentioned it, but do you have you spoken with your children and grandchildren about that there was a healing aspect of
Oh
this
yeah,
work as well?
yeah, they I think understand it fully, and I think they've seen it. Uh, I became much more empathetic in a certain way. I became much more patient in a certain way, and I became less afraid of dealing with difficult subjects. Um, so I think that was good because I spent a lot of time avoiding a lot of things. And
Hmm.
I think I don't know, they still may may avoid more than they should. There's only so much I can do as an example. They have to sort of get it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we all do that. It's very, we don't, a lot of us we just don't want the conflict or the uncomfortable aspect
Mm,
of having those conversations.
right, right.
So, for anybody kind of considering starting, whether it's got this much depth to it as a family story, I mean, do you have any sort of ideas or advice for folks starting on a journey like this?
I think you have to be very, there are the obvious sources, for in my story, the archives of various places where my parents lived. Uh, but it was very important for me, and it'd be very important for anybody who does anything like this, to actually go to as many of the places where they were, just to sort of soak in, even though everything is different. There's a lot that's actually the same. It was only by, for example, going to the place that my mother lived in Krakow for with her family for 25 years, her parents and her brothers, that I found out that Steven Spielberg had actually used my mother's building as the primary setting for the Krakow ghetto and Schindler's List. And when we got there, it had become a tourist attraction because of that. It was a tenement, it was a rundown place, but it was had the perfect look for what he was trying to do. And knowing that was interesting in and of itself, and then understanding uh, that these kinds of places can live again in different ways than she experienced. So I think going places and just keep asking and asking anybody who knows anything about it, and they just keep leading you places beyond the obvious, beyond the, Holocaust museums, if it's that's the subject, or any libraries and other things. You have to try to find primary sources. I found that my father had a niece in Israel, and we went to see her. And we never knew not only that she existed, but that his wife and children existed, and what happened to them and going. So going places is probably the best way because then it not only makes your story better, but it makes you a better interpreter of that story.
Hmm. So a lot of people, even, despite these, very sort of traumatic and challenging stories, talk about, how humor and, can sort of play a role
Mhm.
in the healing. Do you have you experienced that as well?
Well, I experienced it in hindsight. I think actually living some of the crazy stuff that my mother would do and say. Uh, After a while, you got used to it, but it wasn't funny. It was crazy, and unfortunately, that's what she was. So in the book, in Painful Joy, yes, they actually the second half of the book, the first half of the book about their Holocaust experience is not too funny. The second half of the book, which explains how they behaved as a result, a lot of it is bizarre and at the same time quite humorous. And writing it made me feel made me feel that it lightened the story. It lightened what I always saw as a very heavy life that I wanted to escape. And in a certain way, if, for instance, for my grandson, I think he welcomed uh, that lightness as well as all the horror.
Hmm. So, I guess last question, is there, what's sort of the one thing you hope readers will take away from the book?
I think again, I became that way, and what I would hope that people read about these two strangers and history that maybe some people don't know and some people do. Uh, and by the end of the book, you become empathetic as well. You become understanding that these things didn't happen to millions of people, but they happened to individuals and individual families. And to take away the history and just take the personal stories as on their face value, and feel something for them, which is, I think, the best way to sort of heal and to cope with the kind of hate that what happened to them uh, engenders if you dehumanize people. And so giving them a name, giving them a story, I think makes a very big difference. And I hope the readers would do that as well.
So the book is Painful Joy. Is there a website, or people just sort of go online and look
Yeah,
for it?
there. I have. My great joy was actually creating a website all by myself. Not the greatest, but I enjoyed it. So Max Friedman .net, one word, Max Friedman. And you can find a lot more excerpts and other things. Otherwise, Amazon is the easiest way. Paperback, hardcover, Kindle edition. Maybe I'll translate it into Esperanto. Who knows?
There you go. Awesome. Yeah. So we'll make sure we have those links in the show notes for people listening. And Max Friedman, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of KinCast. I hope you've been inspired to capture the magic of your family stories and share them through the power of private podcasts. For more resources and inspiration, visit kincasts.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review and subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, remember every story matters and your family story deserves to be heard. Take care and happy storytelling.